Yo, I'm Gadin and I'm making game solo, and the last few weeks have been a bit crazy. I released the first official trailer for SILKROAD Project, and it ended up more than doubling my Steam wishlist in just 1 week. It got uploaded by game trailers, I got contacted by multiple companies in the industry, and somehow in the middle of all that I also learned a ton about marketing a game. And now that this big milestone is finally behind me, I can start focusing on the next one, working on the first playable prototype. That hopefully will lead to secure financing, either by partnering with a publisher or through a Kickstarter campaign. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about what happened over the last month. If you missed that, I released the first trailer of the game last month. Please have a look and tell me what you think about it in the comments. The reaction to the trailer was way better than I expected. A lot of people reacted very positively, and that honestly meant a lot to me. What made me especially happy was seeing how many people immediately connected with the visuals. I've always wanted SILKROAD Project to feel visually distinct, not just good looking but also recognizable, and something with personality. And seeing people react positively to the art direction made me feel like I'm doing alright in that area. But what surprised me the most was actually something else: the music. I got so many comments about the soundtrack, way more than I expected, and that's funny because out of everything in the trailer, that was probably the thing I was the most nervous about. Mostly because I'm really not a musician, and on top of that, I deliberately made a decision I thought would be a divisive choice. Instead of going with something more traditional, a big orchestral fantasy music, epic choirs, dramatic strings, I leaned into something much more urban, something with boom bap influence that in a way clashed a bit with the aesthetic of the game. I intentionally wanted this clash as it's something I enjoyed very much in anime like Samurai Champloo or Afro Samurai, and I wanted to reproduce the same feeling here. I thought that choice would probably divide people. Some would like it, some would hate it, and honestly that would have been fair. But surprisingly, a lot of people really connected with it. And I'm very happy about that because I think it confirms something important, that taking a creative risk can really pay off. So I'm glad I trusted my instincts there. Now, before releasing the trailer, I also spent a lot of time working on something that was long overdue, my Steam page. I hadn't seriously updated it in a very long time, and a lot of information was outdated. Some descriptions no longer reflected what the game had become, some visuals were old, and overall, it just didn't feel professional enough. And the thing I spent the most time on was the Steam capsule, that tiny little image. Probably the most important image on the whole page, because that usually will be the first picture of the game a player will see while browsing Steam. So it needs to stand out against the thousands of other titles. So to make it, I first posed my two main characters inside Cascada to get a strong dynamic composition. Once I had something I liked, I brought them into Unreal Engine and rendered a very high resolution screenshot with transparency that I brought into Krita, and started painting over it manually. First I did color corrections, then some lighting tweaks, and then the line work, and then some cleanup, and I repainted some parts of the image by hand to soften that raw 3D render feeling and push it closer toward illustration. And in the end, I'm really happy with the result. It looks way more polished than what I had previously, a bit more professional, so if you haven't checked the Steam page in a while, go take a look. I'd love to know what you think of the redesign. And of course, if you like what you see, feel free to wishlist the game. That really helps a lot. Now that I had a shiny new trailer and a refreshed Steam page, the next step was getting it in front of as many people as possible. So the first thing I tried was to look for a place in one of those summer showcases. Things like Summer Game Fest, PC Gaming Show, or similar showcases. And surprisingly, it didn't work for me. I'm a solo developer, I'm working on my first game, I have no publisher, no established reputation yet, no playable public prototype, and not even a release date. So I wasn't expecting too much, but I still think it was worth trying. I realized that if you want to get featured in one of the showcases, you need a realistic release window, and ideally a playable build, which makes complete sense. But at least now I understand the landscape a bit better, and next time I'll come more prepared. So I had to take the classic route, the good old-fashioned method, the social networks. That became a learning experience all on its own too. One of the very first things I tried was simply something simple. I emailed IGN. Just something like, "Hello, I made a trailer. Would you be interested in uploading it on one of your channels?" And very kindly, they accepted to upload it on game trailers. There's something very cool to see your own game displayed on one of the biggest gaming channels. And after that, I started posting the trailer everywhere I could. X, TikTok, Blue Sky, pretty much anywhere I already had an account. For me, the platform that performed best was YouTube and X, which makes sense because that's where I already had the biggest following. Meanwhile, on TikTok, Blue Sky or Instagram, nothing, pretty much silence. Same story on other platforms. And honestly, I think part of that is simply because I've never really built a presence there. Those platforms reward consistency, and that's where I struggle. I genuinely don't know what to say every day. I'm just not wired that way. X is the exception, as I was lucky to get a couple of successful posts several years ago that built up the follower accounts. But it's a platform I tend to avoid now. I prefer long-form communication. I like taking time to gather my thoughts, organizing what happened over months, picking the interesting parts, turning it into something coherent. So that's why I like DevLogs. This format makes sense to me, but daily posting, random instant thoughts, constant engagement, that feels unnatural to me. I don't really have that reflex. That said, there was one platform that completely surprised me, and it was Reddit. And honestly, Reddit was by far my biggest success after YouTube, and I feel the reason is pretty simple. Reddit is discovery friendly in a way most platforms aren't. On most social media, the algorithm decides who sees your posts. On Reddit, you have much more control over who you're talking to, since you pick the community and the audience. So, by posting on gaming subreddits, you're already targeting people with an interest for your game. What worked very well was posting in communities where SILKROAD Project would resonate. One thing I learned was to not underestimate smaller subreddits. Smaller focused communities can actually be very valuable because they care more and they engage more, and they are much more likely to actually wishlist your game. Subreddits like the character action games was one of those niche subreddits where my posts performed very well. And I think it comes from the fact that the combat system of my game is something members are looking for. I also try experimenting with Chinese platforms, mostly because of the influence my game have, and I was curious to see if that could interest a Chinese audience. So first I tried Xiaohongshu or Little Red Notes, which is the equivalent of TikTok but for China. I posted a short there and absolutely nothing happens, which is fair. I mean, it's a brand new account, no followers, no presence, no understanding of the platform. I basically walked into a crowded room, whispered softly and expected everyone to stop talking and looking at me. Yeah, of course it wouldn't work. Then I looked into Bilibili and I was genuinely interested because Bilibili feels much closer to a long-form content platform, closer to YouTube, which fits me better. But when I started creating an account, the amount of documents I had to send turned me down, to be honest. Official documents like a passport or a photo submission, that was a bit too much for me, especially for something that probably would not have generated any views anyway. Then came something completely new for me, the professional press. And this was a whole world I knew nothing about. I discovered a website called Games Press. Until then, my mental image of journalism was basically you send emails and hope somebody reads them. What Games Press offers is a platform where developers and publishers can publish press releases, and journalists from around the world can browse those announcements, look at materials, and decide what they want to cover. Which meant I suddenly had to learn what exactly is a press release, what goes in it, what do journalists expect, and what information matters. And that opened another rabbit hole, because alongside the press release, you also need what's called a press kit, basically everything a journalist might need, like high-resolution logos, screenshots, game descriptions, key art, developer bio, useful assets, icons, branding, contact information. So I built one, and while I was at it, I also made something called a pitch deck. A pitch deck is a document like a PowerPoint with slides that present the game, its unique selling points, its target audience, its development timelines, potential funding needs, the kind of thing you show when talking with industry professionals. Now, what happened after publishing that press release? Interestingly, not what I expected. I expected articles, maybe a media push, but in reality I got a few articles here and there, but not that many. However, and that's what I didn't expected, people from the industry started contacting me, like publishers, localization studios, marketing companies, service providers. And I was able to have conversation I wasn't having before, meeting people, making contacts, growing my networks. This is very valuable and exciting, and honestly pretty motivating too. And after all that work, all the emails, all the posts, the preparation, what was the outcome of all of this? Well, in just 1 week, SILKROAD Project more than doubled its number of wishlists. I have been very happy to see the hard work paid off. For almost 2 years, I'd been slowly building momentum, and then suddenly, since the trailer, you can see the big jump in the graph. I'm still a long way from the ultimate goal of releasing a full-fledged game, but seeing this kind of improvement so early in this project marketing journey is incredibly encouraging. And what really mattered this month was everything I got to learn along the way. I learned how to approach media, how to interact with industry people, how to present a game professionally, how to write a press release, how to build a press kit, how to structure a pitch deck, a better understanding of how platforms behave, where attentions come from, and what convert attention into interest. And now that this milestone is behind me, I can finally put most of my energy back where it belongs, the game itself. And specifically, the next major milestone, a playable prototype. Because ultimately, that's what matters most now. I need something polished enough to put in people's hands, something that represents the vision clearly, something that makes people go, okay, now I get it. And if I can reach that point, it also opens doors. Funding opportunities, more serious conversation with publishers, more confidence from players. Because right now, I'm still fully self-funded, which gives me creative freedom, but also means resources are limited. So my next objective is building something strong enough to secure more stability, and to do that, I need combat to level up. Right now, the combat works. It's functional, all the important stuff is there, but it's not where it needs to be yet. It still lacks depth, it still becomes repetitive too quickly, and right now players can rely too much on simple button mashing. What I want is combat that encourages adaptations, decision-making, and situational choices. So I want to add more combo branches, better timing windows, more enemy behaviors, and smarter interaction between player and enemy. One thing I'm very happy about is that I finally finished migrating all my characters to the epic rigs inside Unreal Engine, which means every character now shares the same skeleton, even the spirits, and that's important because now animations can be shared much more easily across characters. That saves times, especially when dealing with features like physics or animation blending, since those features can also be shared with everyone. And generally, it makes my pipeline less painful. I also spent some time cleaning up code. It had been over a year since I seriously touched some of these systems. And since then, I added a lot of features, changed a lot of mechanics, updated Unreal multiple times, and so I needed to do a little bit of maintenance, so I spent time cleaning that up. Another major change, I'm moving away from Epic's behavior trees for enemy AI. Instead, I'm switching fully to Logic Driver Pro, which is a plugin I already use extensively in the project. I use it for combo systems, dialogue systems, gameplay state management. A bunch of core systems already run through it, and over time, I've become very comfortable with it. At this point, it just feels more natural to me than behavior trees. I find it more flexible and more readable, and because when tools feel intuitive, iterations becomes faster. With that new AR framework in place, I started implementing more decision-making behavior for enemies. Nothing complex, but just enough to make the enemy's interaction feels a bit more natural and thoughtful. So for example, when enemies get close to the player, they now sometimes choose to disengage by doing a backdash. That creates space and changes the rhythm of the combat. And on the opposite side, when enemies are far away, they now sometimes choose aggressive gate closers, like jumping attack to quickly re-engage. So it now forces the player to be a bit more on the move by chasing the enemy and avoid having a blob of enemies around the player all the time. Even with just those two simple behaviors, fights already feels noticeably better, less static and more alive, which is exactly what I wanted. There's still a lot of work ahead. I need to add new moves, more combo variety, but it's a step in the right direction. So yeah, Sorry again for missing last month, but hopefully this extra chunky devlog makes up for it. A lot happened, I learned a lot, the project grew a lot, and now it's time to build the next piece. As always, thank you for following the project, thank you for your comments, thank you for your support. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next devlog. Take care.